property, Tokisuk, which belongs to Tshwane University of Technology, is an absolute treasure. It's actually two treasures, as Andrew has indicated. There's an Iron Age site and the Leiden University Observatory here. And the magnitude, the importance of those sites to the university and to the biosphere, and in fact to South Africa as a whole, these are two exceptionally important national heritage sites, and they're a very important treasure to the whole concept of a biosphere, which, as we all know, is a multidisciplinary idea of using our assets, using our natural assets and heritage assets, rather than putting a fence around them and chasing everybody out. So these are sites that are very, very important from that point of view, and I'll try and explain them to you by telling the story that lies behind them. This is the site that we're on, and this photograph, can everybody see this thing adequately? The site that we're on is now the property of Tshwane University. It was originally just what surveyors called afvalgrond. It was the bit of land that wasn't flooded. It had been expropriated by the government. 1923, Hartbeespoort Dam filled up, and this little corner, which was the top corner, was not flooded. And that is a wonderful thing, because it has these incredible sites on it. I'm going to talk more about the telescopes later, because I'm hoping you'll all just walk up to see them, and then I can explain them. They have an amazing story. All I want to say about them now is just briefly that 1923, when the Hartbeespoort Dam flooded, was also the year that Robert Innes got himself awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Leiden. Leiden has the oldest and the most prestigious operating observatory in the world, and in 1923 it had that stature, and they awarded him a doctorate because, and it was in fact the only qualification that he ever had. He left school at the age of 12, and he taught himself, and through self-learning and teaching astronomy, he became one of the world's leading astronomers in the 1910s and 1920s. I'll be talking a little bit more about him and the telescopes he used when we go up there. But what he did do when he was getting his doctorate in the Netherlands is met up with his counterpart, the director, De Witte, of the Leiden Observatory, and they entered an arrangement whereby South African observers could go to Holland and utilize the fabulous resources of the Leiden Observatory. Leiden astronomers could come here and look at our fabulous skies. And I'm not, when I say fabulous skies, southern skies viewed from Johannesburg in the 1920s was a spectacle that astronomers actually just dreamed about. And they had free access to do this. And that was a very successful arrangement. They viewed from the Johannesburg Union Observatory in the suburb of Observatory for about 30 years, 5 of which were the years of the World War, so there was limited use then, but generally for that period. But by 1950, that light pollution from the city was getting a problem, becoming a problem to observers through telescopes, and so they moved their telescopes out to this site here, because largely it was just, as I said, afvalgrond. It was land that was available for no other purpose at the time. And they put up these buildings which housed 3 very, very important telescopes, and they operated here for another 25 years. And the observations that were made here were extremely important internationally, worldwide, because if you remember, the 1950s and 60s was the beginning of the space age. That's when the Russians put up Sputnik satellite, the first satellite in space. It's when NASA launched satellites and moon discoveries and so on. And at that stage, there was no way of viewing the universe other than through a telescope. And a lot of the work that actually generated the theories that we have now of an expanding universe were made from these telescopes here, looking upwards. One of the guys who came out to work here, and he stayed in a little cottage that we'll walk past in a moment, was a guy called Arno van Genderen, And he lived in the cottage with his wife and his, sorry, I've got to get a grip on this thing, his wife and his baby daughter for 8 years. And outside of his cottage, he found a whole lot of potsherds and artifacts of various types. He was a little bit of an amateur archaeologist himself. He realized that he was looking at something very special, but nobody at the observatory and nobody in the neighborhood knew anything about this. What on earth were these things? So he went up to Wits University and he spoke to Revel Mason about what he had found. And in a later article that Revel wrote, he said that Revel wrote this. He says, in April 1973, a slender, dark-haired Hollander called Arno van Genderen knocked on my office door with a brown paper bag. He was an astronomer from the Leiden Observatory near Hartbeespoort Dam. He opened the bag and poured out a pile of decorated potsherds that he had found, pardon me, that he had found near the observatory. Instantly, I recognized the decorations. I knew that they were over 1,000, over 1,000 years older than those that I had seen at Olifantspoort. Olifantspoort is way towards the Rustenburg area, and there's a famous Iron Age site there. Iron Age is about the sort of 18th, 19th century. These potsherds, he realized, were at least 1,000 years older, and later, when he excavated this site, he realized they were actually a lot more than 1,000 years older. This site was a village in about 350 AD. Now, if you can cast or if you can't cast your mind back to 350 AD, realize that at that time Britain was an outlying province of the Roman Empire. The British were running around painting themselves with woad, blue woad, and wearing bear skins. That's the time period that we're talking about. And Revel excavated this site here, and he revealed an extraordinary village where all sorts of extremely interesting things were going on here 1,700 years ago. And it was, in fact, the first long-term settlement of black people in South Africa. Now, white South Africans have got monuments to Jan van Riebeeck, and they get very excited about their landing here in 1652. Black people have got nothing showing where they arrived and where they began their occupation of South Africa. And this is the site that could one day be used to commemorate that. In fact, it should be used for that purpose. What we will see today is, in fact, you won't see it because all of this excavation has now become overgrown. This was in the 1970s. Tom Huffman, you can't see these names, but Tom Huffman, another well-known archaeologist, both of them sadly died in the last couple of years, but Tom also excavated this site, and he worked out where the people had come from, and he did it by looking at potsherd patterns, and he traced the fact from the patterns on the pots that people had come down here from about 2000 or perhaps earlier than not 2000, from 2,000 years ago. They started somewhere in Central Africa and migrated southwards gradually. And what they brought with them were a number of skills that allowed them to no longer be hunter-gatherers. The people who were already here, living here and in most of Africa, were hunter-gatherers, and every day they had to hunt and gather their food resources, and so that limited their ability to utilize the landscape. One of the skills that prevented you or allowed you not to be a hunter-gatherer was the use of pots. If you can make a pot, you can first of all carry liquid, you can store liquid, you can store foodstuffs, which means that you can pot, and then the pot would sit in the middle of the village. Now there are, I think, 4 or 5 that were found on this site. Burials are, of course, a very sensitive thing. In the 1970s, Revel excavated them. In the plans that we've got, we're going to use subterranean radar to see where the burials are, so they remain undisturbed, and there won't be any sensitive disruption of them. So new technology will be helping us quite a lot. But this was a very important thing, and burial sites are known from East Africa, but not from the later Iron Age. So the people who lived here were conducting a lifestyle that has has been lost in South Africa now, or one of the aspects of it, and I've no doubt others as well. The other thing that they found, and this is terribly important, was the use of iron and the smelting of iron. And there's a good reason for this, and there's a good reason why this arrow, this migration stopped here and didn't go any further onto the Highveld, is because here there are very rich iron deposits in the mountains. Those iron deposits were made 2.5 billion years ago when cyanobacteria released oxygen. Oxygen oxidized the iron, solvent iron, and turned it into iron ore. So we have very rich iron rocks in this area. Very, very much later than the time I'm talking about, ISCOR discovered the same thing. And that's why ISCOR's headquarters is up on the hill in Pretoria. So rich is the iron that this little rock, which is one of a billion that are up on the mountain behind us, is magnetic. It's got so much iron in it that a little fridge magnet will stick to it, like that. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a little magnet, and it just glues itself to the rock. And you can go out there, you don't have to be a high-powered geologist with a fridge magnet, you just go and you can tell where the iron is. And these people knew that, and they smelted iron by putting it into a furnace with a tuyere. This is a pipe made of clay through which they pumped air from probably some sort of bellows, but of course the bellows have disintegrated in the last 1700 years. Now the other thing that was found here and puzzled Revell for a while was Stone Age tools. In other words, the hunter-gatherer tools and artifacts that we associate with the hunter-gatherer communities, the San communities. Things like digging sticks, which are bored stones that you thread onto a stick, and then they give it impetus when you dig up a root. There were little grindstones for ochre, and ochre was really used more by San people than it possibly was by these people. Stone arrowheads and spearheads, ostrich eggshell beads threaded into necklaces and ornaments of one sort or another. So there was a lot of that sort of thing in the site, and there was a good deal of speculation by Revell and by Tom. Were San people integrated into this society? Were they subjected and subjugated and servile? But now Justin Bradfield, an archaeologist who's got an interest in this site, has got a new theory, and in fact he's demonstrating it. They were probably not made by hunter-gatherers. They were probably made by the so-called Iron Age people, because it's actually easier to make some implements out of stone than it is to smelt iron and make something out of an iron implement. So he's working on that, and he's working particularly on the use of bone tools, which were manufactured here, and a lot of bone tools have been done here. So we now know that there was quite a sophisticated culture and quite a busy village. I have no doubt that the dam water submerges a lot more that we could have learnt from this, but it's been lost to us now. And so we were aware of this. When I say we are now leaping to MACH, the Magaliesburg Association for Culture and Heritage, a number of us knew about this, and in 2019 we were going to put a blue plaque on here to celebrate Revell. We were less aware of the telescopes here, but we thought a blue plaque would be a nice idea until COVID had better ideas than ours, and that would play to that. And sadly, Revell died, and so did Tom Huffman in the subsequent years. So that blue plaque was never placed. But I had written about it in a book that I wrote about the biosphere at about that time, 2019. And a copy of that book got into the hands of Arno van Genderen, the guy who'd actually discovered this place. And he got in touch with me through the publishers, and we've had a wonderful friendly correspondence over the last 2 or 3 years, talking about this place and his life here. And he sent me an old 8mm movie of him and Revell working on the site. And it's been a wonderful experience just knowing him and working with him. He also had a very interesting life. He was born in the Dutch East Indies, and when he was about 5 or 6 years old, the Japanese overran the Dutch East Indies, and he and his family were interned in an internment camp. Not a happy place to spend your childhood. And he says to me that the only beautiful thing he ever saw as a child was the night sky, which is why he eventually grew up to be an astronomer and come here and work here for 8 years. So there's a fabulous story about this environment.